What an interesting time for Thingo to fail. No, I'm just kidding.
We're live. Hello.
Hi.
And welcome to the pouch.
Welcome to the pouch.
I am Greg Savage, as you can see by the little ticker down the bottom. And off to my right is my wonderful friend.
Fake Jar Wharton.
Fake Jar Wharton.
Jake Far Wharton. We are the pouch.
We are the pouch, the podcast we deal with Australian news and politics.
Not so seriously.
That's right. Everything else is so serious, you know?
Yeah.
You know?
Everything.
Even the weekly. Even the weekly is so serious.
Even the weekly. It's
Lighten
so
up.
serious.
Lighten up, Charlie. Charles.
Yeah. With your serious eyebrows.
Yeah.
Far out.
Your
And your
jokes.
serious forehead. And your well-researched, integral pieces of journalism.
Anyway, call us, Charlie. This is a live recording of our show, and usually we just leave this up on Facebook. So hello to everyone listening to us or watching us later on Facebook.
Yes.
We record the live show, and then this is sort of the segments from here will be edited down to the actual podcast. You can head to thepouchofpodcast.com where you can choose your favorite podcast player of choice and subscribe that way. We've had huge increases in traffic this week, Jake. Huge. Enormous.
Well, I'm not surprised.
We actually made it into the top 20 of Australian news podcasts. So congratulations to you, Jake. I put it all onto you.
Congratulations to you. I put it all on you.
I'm happy to go 70-40.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
70-40.
Yeah.
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 Nobody
Well,
ever said
you
were
always
an
give
absolute-
110%.
I love it.
But yeah, stick around. You can leave comments in the comment section below, and I can bring those up on the screen. We can discuss those, and more often than not, they actually make it into the show, the actual recorded version of the podcast. So it's great. But yeah, leave your comments, and we deal with Australian news and politics, and so
seriously,
you can not so seriously, and you can discuss that. We're still working on our lighting. So
I think that's a veiled comment towards me.
No, it's also me. I can't stop looking at the red spots on my forehead. All right, we're gonna start. Going with this. I have a rare skin condition. Don't mock me.
Yep.
All right. Hello, and welcome to The Pouch, the peeling, sunburnt skin of podcasts that aims to help the average Aussie try and make sense of their current political environment. I'm Greg. Oh boy, I can't wait until Monday morning's commute. Savage.
And I'm Jake. I love winter in Queensland. It's the most wonderful day of the year. Far Wharton. On today's episode, we talk casual workers, casual borders, and casually saving $60 billion.
And Jake, I'd like to just elaborate a little bit on a story that's come up about Chinese relationships with Australian universities. And I want to know, Jake, are we able to break free of China's stranglehold?
Spoiler alert, absolutely not.
At this point, I don't think it's really a spoiler, is it? It's not really a spoiler. I mean,
look, I did hear a lot of commentary this week saying we could totally go it alone without China.
Did you?
Yeah. Not from reputable journalists, no. Or reputable commentators, but
like
anyway,
high school magazines.
I'd just like to say hi to Joe from the pub. He sends his well wishes.
Absolutely.
He's also positive that we can break away from China.
Yeah, Joe doesn't have a lot to lose.
No, he has a lot to gain though.
Yeah, integrity. You know.
Yeah.
So,
for me.
What a week, particularly for workers here in Australia. We're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the casual worker situation, which is unfolded, and we're also going to try and explore how we lost a whole bunch of workers as well, and saved ourselves. What, 60? Was it 60 billion?
Yeah, $60 billion.
Yeah. It's quite an accounting error, but we'll get to that. Jake, our first story this week has to deal with the casual workers, and you've got a story here which says not so casual now, because they're not, are they?
Well, they remain casual, I suppose. It's just it's really the Federal Court of Australia has has essentially forced us to rethink the premise of being casual. You know, when you think about the term casual, away from the latter part of that that proposal of worker, if you think about the word casual itself, it conjures themes of just casually walking into a place and then casually walking out at your own leisure. And the way that it has been used in the terms of workers in Australia has been a little bit wonky for a large portion of the workforce for a long time. You can think of, I'm sure we all know someone who is a casual worker, i.e. they're employed on a casual contract, but have been there working the same hours as, say the part-time and full-time workers on a very regular basis for potentially a couple of years.
Yeah.
And the federal court found earlier this week that casual workers who work these regular and predictable shifts with a firm advanced commitment to work were not casuals, despite how they were described in employment contracts. And therefore, absolutely great wording. Therefore, we're entitled to paid annual sick and carers leave, which is pretty huge, because casual workers are a reasonable portion of Australia's workforce.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that's come out of the pandemic has been this ongoing conversation about casual workers, and an increase in value, I imagine, to the casual workforce as well. Particularly if you're in the hospitality industry, particularly if you're female, particularly if you're, just reintroducing yourself into a new workforce, if you've done some training and now you're getting into that workforce. Newer businesses often hire casuals, while the people who own the business are doing the work themselves, a bulk of the work themselves. And I'm just going to go and throttle my neighbour's dog.
I wondered if you were going to comment.
Very politely.
He
does have great timing. I think the neighbour's dog gets tremendously excited when we start the podcast, because I
think so too.
Yeah,
I have actually heard that he cares passionately about casual workers and the plight of said workers.
Look, I think, absolutely. What we're better off doing is just getting the microphone and taking it out to him for this hard hitting, the pooch.
Yeah, what's his or her name?
Mary, like
Mary.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. So just thrust the microphone in his face and say, "Merry Christmas."
Merry.
What are your what are your thoughts on the way that Australian Industry Group, which represents roughly 60,000 employees or employers rather in Australia, what do you think their take on this decision by the High Court? What do you feel about that?
He'd say, well, it's very hairy. We just need to pause for a moment.
There's an underlying growl, a growl of discontent in the heckles of the workplace.
Dear.
Well, he's definitely stopped now.
No, he hasn't stopped. The dog continues. This is fun.
Red Bull, give us a lead.
Yeah. I think the neighbour's dog has had one too many Red Bulls this morning. Dear.
Oh, good. Somebody else has joined in.
Hey.
Somebody's come to visit. On a lighter topic.
Yeah, let's discuss the weather.
I found this week a figurine that my daughter said resembled me, and I wanted your feedback. The thing. I mean, if I hold him relatively close.
Go to your left a little bit, in front of you. Yeah. That'll do. That is too far to your left. Go back to your right. Yeah, that's good. That's perfect. That is hilarious. Who is that?
The answer is I don't know.
You don't know who that figurine is?
Yeah, it says naughty dog on his.
That's an overlap.
Which does make a lot. That is an interesting. Yeah, that is very interesting.
Jake, that is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. Oh dear. All right, what an interlude.
Yep.
Okay, when we're selling Jake figurines at the Pouch the Podcast store.
Yeah.
You can go to thepouchthepodcast.com and spend
Your
your
naughty
time
dog.
trying to find the store.
So it kind of sounds like the dog's finished.
Yeah. We've got the tranquilizer out. Yeah.
So yeah, look, the mining union secretary Tony Ma, whose union intervened in the case, said that the decision was fantastic, saying it rebuked employers who called their workers casuals but employed them on full-time hours.
Yeah.
Quote: employers must now stop with the nonsense that calling a worker a casual makes them so. Quote, when a job is full-time, regular and ongoing, it is permanent and it deserves the security and entitlements that come from permanent work. Now, the interesting thing here is, and actually the Australian Industry Group has, which actually represents roughly 60,000 employers across Australia, said that the decision would discourage employers bringing on casual workers and hurt the economy. And the reason for that is, the presumption here is that casual workers, and I did hear a lot of backbencher employees, but a lot of backbencher MPs speaking this week saying, this is a ridiculous decision. Casual employees are paid more in order to essentially, have that buffer of more pay so that they can, pay for those things that they miss out on in a normal permanent contract. But the interesting thing here is that the case that precipitated this this finding related to an individual who was employed on a contract by a company and then was outsourced to another company, to a company like these these big industry groups, the labour hire type of companies, for a lower casual rate. But he was, essentially contracted to that new place, to that existing place where he used to work on a permanent contract at a lower rate. Pardon.
You're right.
So it is a real stinker, and it is one of those things. But I similarly heard a lot of backbenchers this week saying, this is ridiculous. We've got to prevent this from going through. But ultimately, what this is it exposes an issue in how potentially employers are exploiting the casual term and the casual awards in Australia in order to essentially get the best of both worlds. You get an employee, you pay them the award, which isn't necessarily amazing, and you don't have to pay them for a maternity, you don't have to pay them for sick leave or various other parts of what an ordinary permanent employee will be, but you can essentially have them there every day. So this is a landmark case, and while it may indeed take a bit of a scalpel to parts of the economy where organizations and industries will have to reset how they their expectations around workers and what they do and how they're employed. It will mean that those industries and those employers are in the future going to have to be honest with how and on what basis they employ their employees.
Yeah, so I suppose it doesn't seem like they're doing anything particularly illegal, right? Like none of these employees are doing anything illegal. It's more just, like you said, like an exploitation of the system,
like a shonky practice.
Yeah,
but it's certainly a legal shonky practice.
Okay, so so the ultimate change here is that if I'm a casual and I'm getting a certain amount of hours that are predictable, and I have an ongoing sort of commitment from the employer that I'm going to get these hours, that I'll eventually change into more of a contract basis. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's more that employee is now open to challenge the basis on which they are employed, and moreover,
that always works out well.
Exactly. It's a great reason to be fired. As I'm sure we've all heard stories about people who challenged their employer and very quickly were swiftly kicked out. But look. It gives them grounds. I think there's legislation coming through as well that will essentially force the hand of the employer. If you're employing someone on this basis, it'll force you to make a decision essentially and change them to permanent.
Yeah.
There is some calls as well, or some cause to think that there will be back pay, particularly in terms of holiday and recreational type sick leave and other forms of leave and other benefits that might come to a permanent employee. But at this stage, we haven't heard whether that will actually be enforced. But certainly there is some cause to think that in the future this precedent will force some form of back pay arrangement.
From this particular date? So you're saying, like, if I'm a casual between now and whenever this gets through, what is it? Does it have to go through Parliament at the moment? Does it?
Well, so the original finding was 2 years ago. So it's
well, that's going to be fun for everyone.
Yeah, essentially, you're thinking about 2 years worth of back pay, and a lot of the industries that we're talking about here, we are talking about miners, MINERS.
Yeah.
We are also talking about lots of organisations and industries that work and operate on very slim margins as well. So the restaurant and dining industry, who might employ, say, chefs or sous chefs or other forms of people that I don't know their titles,
like waiters?
on a very waiters. There you go, on a very
Waitresses?
permanent basis. When waitresses, exactly,
Baristas?
exactly.
The person who does the chalkboard jokes?
No, they're not. The chalkboard jokes. The things that bring people into the place. Exactly. Those people. It is affecting those industries. So it's an interesting thing here. It may, in fact, force a rethink of how this is implemented based on the number of employees that, or rather, industries and organisations that might go bust because of having to back pay workers that are eligible. So we'll just have to see. We will just have to see, but on the face of it, it's a pretty damn good thing, and it's great to see this kind of finding, backing up people who really deserve it.
Absolutely. If coronavirus has done one thing, it's strengthened our resolve with our casual workforce.
Yep.
Now,
Has it?
No. It's done many things.
Yeah, not
I
that.
don't think that's even one of them. Now, Jake, speaking of casual workforce,
Yes.
Alan Jones, who's now
big
sponsor of the show. Alan Jones, who is now casual. He's jobless, isn't he? Doesn't have a job.
Well, I think actually, funnily enough, he has a regular segment, I think, twice a week on Sky News, as
good.
well as he publishes quite regularly editorials in one of the papers, most likely the Daily Telegraph.
Yeah.
So, yes.
He's doing all right.
Casual? I don't know. He's doing okay for himself.
All right. So he was told to figuratively put a sock in it after... his comments for Jacinda Ardern, which, it's just not going to make you popular at the moment, is it? If you start saying terrible things about Jacinda Ardern, it's just not a good it's not a good public relations move. However, it's not necessarily even about that. It's about what he actually said, and what he said was tremendously disgusting. And I'm very, very happy that this has come out. Now, I'm not saying that Alan Jones is evil or Alan Jones is this or that, but this particular comment certainly before a court ruling felt evil. I'm not even sure. Was it a court ruling?
So the ACMA, which is the Australian Media and Communications Authority, they did a what do you call it, like an investigation, a report into into the comments essentially, and seeing whether they breached the ACMA's code of conduct, I believe it is.
And they did.
Yeah, breach it.
All right.
Broadcasting rules is what it was.
Give us a bit of background. Tell us what happened and what is happening and what will happened.
Yeah, so the media watchdog, the Australian Media and Communications Authority, has found that outgoing, I should say, talkback radio host. Oh, that's what I scripted. Talkback radio host Alan Jones has had breached multiple media rules for his comments about the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and inaccurate claims about climate change while broadcasting last year. While he did issue an on-air correction earlier this week after an investigation, he was found to breach these broadcasting rules. And essentially, it relates to comments that he made where he essentially said Prime Minister Scott Morrison should, quote, shove a sock down the throat of Miss Ardern and get tough with a few backhanders.
Yeah.
So essentially, there were around 125 complaints relating to the broadcast last August.
Yes.
And I mean, it's not.
I'm surprised it was only 125, to be honest with you, because once I heard it, I was tempted to write a letter of complaint. I'll give you the tip.
Exactly. But the thing is, I suppose that's all it took. I mean, it really only takes one complaint to launch an investigation into whether something has breached the broadcasting rules.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing here is when the issue arose, and it was following essentially a warning that was made at the Pacific Islands Forum in Tuvalu. That essentially saying that Australia would need to answer to the Pacific on climate change. But what essentially happened soon after that is a group of, I'll say, left-leaning Twitter campaigners, social justice activists. They started.
Polite, Jake.
They start. Hey, look,
I've heard them called.
They've done some interesting things.
What do you think Alan Jones would call them?
I think he would say that they should.
That's a good. Okay.
But so what essentially happened was this group of Twitter activists essentially started lambasting and harassing the sponsors of Alan Jones's show, of 2GB's show, and in doing so, they encouraged the sponsors of the show to essentially dump Alan Jones as a sponsor. So that happened, and roughly 50% of the show's revenue was went up in flames,
right,
as a consequence of these rather reprehensible comments. And Jones, who announced, I think, roughly a week and a half ago that he would be retiring now, has said, across his broadcasting history, he has said a number of, particularly reprehensible things.
Yeah.
Particularly about, our former Prime Minister Julia Gillard. He was, incredibly abrasive and rude, and frankly, it was unbecoming of anyone to be talking about a prime minister in a particular way, regardless of whether you disagreed with their politics or their policy. It was some pretty ridiculous and reprehensible commentary. But I think this is a fair finding, even though it only came for 125 complainants. But I think a fair finding, and certainly whether there is a fine attached to it, I'm unsure. But at the very least, Jones won't be coming back, anymore to spout his, his vitriol and scurrilous claims about climate change into the future, thanks to his retirement.
I mean, look, that's the thing, right? It's on the one hand, you're seeing all these stories about the fact that Jones is, getting in trouble for saying these terrible things, and then you literally have the Prime Minister of Australia ringing up and saying, "Gosh, you've done a great job. You're so not biased, and you're so based in a world of fact, and you're so wise and noble." They basically are just rubbing his belly like the Buddha while they give him phone calls. They may as well be making 3 wishes on his belly. Yep. I don't know if that's how the Buddha works, but I don't.
I think so.
Is it just good luck? Do you just get good luck? Anyway, rub his bald head, right? And I don't want to say anything bad about it. Puts you in a challenging mindset, because you really don't want to be backing someone who says such terrible things on air and just plows through like it never happened. Anyway, I do appreciate.
It is, of course, interesting that it was this thing that caused the sponsors to drop him. Because he
did they drop because of the Jacinda thing or because of the climate change thing?
So,
both?
Well, essentially both, because they were so inextricably tied. But
right.
look, he said he did what was it, the Convoy for Change or something to that order.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
He's always been what's the term? Climate change skeptic? No,
Yeah.
climate change denier. He's always been a climate change denier and a vociferous one at that.
Ooh.
And he's regularly brought on his program, debunked climate change researchers who show climate change facts to be questionable, but they're people whose claims simply don't stand up to any level of scrutiny. But he was always an interesting person, and he was always saying pretty reprehensible things about particularly people in power. He did, however, have a couple of, things that he did that were reasonably okay. He did. Look, actually, I don't want to talk about that. Let's move on.
He showed up to work, didn't he?
Yeah, he did regularly. Particularly during coronavirus, the hopes of coronavirus.
He gave the people what they wanted.
Yeah,
he gave the listeners of 2GB what they wanted. He committed.
Exactly.
Anyway, yes, okay, so that's good. I mean, a little bit of justice there, which is wonderful. I don't think, I think you've got to go goose for gander on that one as well. You've got to go for the fact that if someone else was on air saying those ridiculous things about him, he'd probably have something to say about it. It's just they're just tremendously terrible things. And I do understand being a professional, radio host myself, Jake. Being a professional podcaster myself, that sometimes when you talk for a long time, you find yourself going down a bit of a weird path and you go, oh, goodness me, I'm about to say something a bit odd there that may not even align with your own thoughts. But at the same time, that's a bit of a skill, isn't it?
It is. It is.
To stop yourself short of saying, I do appreciate the fact.
I suppose we have the benefit of being able to edit out things that we perhaps.
Well, not on Facebook.
That's true.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, look, you sometimes you just have to say those things that come into your head. But if those sorts of things are coming into your head, I think it says something about your character. Now, okay. So we are the Pouchlet Podcast. We are currently live on Facebook. If you do have a comment, you can leave it in the comments section, and we can bring it up on the screen and discuss that. Speaking of discussing, Jake, we did receive a review this week, which I'd just like to take a little interlude to read this from. Now, Jake, I don't want to presume that people make up false names on false titles on Apple Podcast review pages, but I'm going to take his word for it. iTunes fanboy number one. I mean, if he's number one,
yes,
we have to take his review seriously.
Exactly. His
basically 2-sentence review. But we're going to read it out. He gave us 4 stars, which is okay.
Yeah. I think 4 stars is an honest review.
Yeah.
It's sort of saying I have thought hard enough about the things that I like and don't like so much, but I have honestly thought holistically about this podcast, and I feel it to be above average.
Yeah, slightly above average. He said, his title was "It Didn't Make My Ears Bleed,"
which is great.
That's good. All this recording equipment is paying off. That's a feature that I rate highly in a podcast.
Yeah.
But seriously, why aren't we growing hemp? That's right, iTunes fanboy number one. What a hard-hitting review. And he agrees with me on something. So there you go. Bonus points on that one. Thank you very much for the review, iTunes fanboy number one. If you are enjoying the show, you can head to the Apple Podcasts app, and you can just tap the 5-star button and leave us a little review, and we'll read it out on air, and your name and everything. Everything. You get the whole kit and caboodle. You can also head to thepouchpodcast.com and choose your favorite podcast player of choice. We are the Pouch Podcast. We deal with Australian news and politics.
Not so seriously.
That's right. Serious, but not so serious. Yeah. Goodness me. You don't want to get so serious.
No. Un-Australian.
Yeah, it is un-Australian. It is un-Australian. Now, Jake.
Get Dad ScoMo out here.
P. Dutty.
Yes.
P. Dutty?
P. Dutty.
He's getting stir crazy.
Yeah.
I haven't read this article, so let's wing it a little bit. Jake, tell me what's happening.
Well, the Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, P. Duddy, has encouraged Queenslanders to challenge the constitutionality
Oh, good.
of the state's border closures, saying people are, quote, right to test the ban, as state leaders continue to spar over the refusal by some premiers to open or reopen state borders. P. Duddy said later this week that the rhetoric, further by telling a bunch of journalists that he believed Queenslanders should test whether the border closures were allowed by the Constitution. Quote, people are right to test that if they think it's not allowed by the Constitution because it's affecting people's lives. Of course, the federal government until now have been saying that you should listen not just to the Chief Health Officer, the Commonwealth Chief Health Officer, but also the Chief Health Officers of each of the states and territories. So this is, of course, an interesting move by a federal minister to essentially suggest that the Premier and the Chief Health Officer of Queensland is not just doing this to protect Queenslanders, but instead I actually don't know what his argument is.
Well, it'll probably be
just
something
it's inconvenient.
Yeah, I think that, this certainly gets a feel of US fever about it, doesn't it? Because it's a huge political football in the US. The idea that it's the liberals, the left-leaning people who want to keep the borders shut, keep everyone locked down, keep your freedoms away, whereas it's the right who want to open up the borders and keep everything moving. And you lose people either way. You lose people with coronavirus, but you probably lose more if you keep your states and your workforce and stuff locked down, and you keep everyone inside. You keep the economy stuck in a bit of a strong, what do you call it, a pattern hold?
Yep, holding pattern.
Holding pattern, that's it. So it's certainly got a little bit of a whiff of that. And now that seems to be a bit of a successful political campaign in the States, if I may be honest about that. The idea that, they should be opening up. All the states have opened up in the States. So I would say that that's probably where this is headed as well. The idea that, if you start putting pressure on premiers to start opening up the borders, then you do turn it into a bit of a political situation, one in which you can say, hey, look at what we did. We put the pressure on. They were just being a bit, sort of too pervasive about this whole thing. The premiers are being a bit too pervasive, and they need to be opening up because, that's what we're doing. We're all opening up. We're all sending the message that we're opening up. Don't keep yourselves so locked in. Don't keep the money out. That's what their slogan should be. We got there in the end.
I suppose, though, the issue here is that this is balancing an economic argument with the health of Queenslanders.
Yeah.
And of the rest of the states and territories as well, because we obviously share a border with the Northern Territory as well. So
who has no
it
cases,
is one of those things.
No cases.
Exactly. So we could be exporting them if it gets open. But in the grand scheme of things here, it is a bit rich of a federal parliamentarian, of a federal member of parliament, to tell the state premier, who essentially by all rights, both the Prime Minister and the Chief Health Officer's message to this point has been, you guys, we've made this 3-step plan. And it's a good 3-step plan, and we like our 3-step plan. But you, as state premiers and state chief health officers, will need to decide how and when these steps are implemented based on, the best evidence that you're advising within that state. And essentially, what Peter Dutton's done here is he's said, forget that. I know better, and I'm suggesting that you should do what I say, not what the chief health officer says. So it's just a bit rich. It's a bit rich, and it's a bit unfortunate. And I realise that he's a Queenslander and probably wants to travel around the country. But, frankly, these rules are for everyone, and they're there for a reason. They're there, like we orchestrated the lockdown to prevent Australians being killed. We put this lockdown in, we put everything into a holding pattern so that we could scale up our hospitals and allow for the room that was necessary in order to carry the influx of people that were predicted into hospital safely. And sure, the influx didn't happen as we predicted it, but that's because of the lockdown.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is crazy to me. I feel that it's classic Peter Dutton, but it is nonetheless, it's just crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, look, on the one hand, I sort of see it like there's a really good point about the fact that states have been left to their own devices, and so we should probably leave that idea alone. But at the same time, at least we know what Peter Dutton thinks, and I think people like that. Like he's a politician and he's voted in to sort of speak on behalf of the people. And maybe that's what he feels like he's doing as well. Maybe he has a lot of evidence to back up the fact that, people want the borders reopened up, that businesses want the borders opened back up, that it's hurting businesses, that it's hurting people, that the pain and suffering of the coronavirus might actually not outweigh the pain and suffering of keeping the borders shut, which I suppose, And, so at least he's sort of, I don't know, he's not the sort of politician who wants to keep everybody happy. He doesn't care if he ticks a few people off.
No.
If he's speaking what he believes to be true.
I mean, look, Peter Dutton has said some pretty interesting things in the past. He was the one that claimed that Sudanese gangs running around in Victoria. He was the one that said that asylum seekers are coming here. They're illiterate in both their language and in English, and yet are taking Australians' jobs. What jobs are they taking of people that are anyway? So he's not always entirely aligned with in the things that he says. They're not always entirely aligned with best evidence and reality.
Yeah.
And in this claim, I feel it's probably quite bad strategy in calling out specifically saying, everything up to this point, you were to listen to your Premier and you were to listen to the Prime Minister and you were to listen to the Commonwealth and the state-based Chief Health Officer up to this point. Now, I want you to listen to me. Okay, forget what the Chief Health Officer says for the state. Forget what the Premier is saying for the state. Listen to me. I'm the authority. Essentially, that's what he's saying by saying, forget what they're talking about. We should just open it.
Yeah, and you really don't want to stoke the fires of discontent.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means. But
I mean, I do understand what he's doing. Like we've got an election coming up in Queensland later on in the year, and this is he's done his best. 2 weeks ago, he referred to the Queensland government as corrupt.
Yes.
And without any actual evidence of where that corruption was coming from.
Yeah. That was during the Virgin thing, yeah.
It was during the Virgin thing. So, look, it's just one of those things. I understand he's probably trying to seed the seeds of discontent, but sow the seeds of discontent rather. But yeah, look, it's just unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. Now, Josh Frydenberg was in the news this week. They're having a good time. They've got a bit of extra money under their proverbial belt.
Yes, somewhat.
Well, they shouldn't keep their money there for a start, particularly 60 billion. Is it?
Yes.
What is it? What are we on to? Is that what we're on to? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the number. So this is a story about the fact that the JobKeeper was overestimated. I'm going to jump to my conclusion about this in that it wasn't actually a government fault. Essentially, it was workers. It was employees overestimating. Is that right? All right. Talk. Okay. Good. Okay. So I know what I'm talking about.
Essentially,
you tell the listeners, Jake, what they should know about this.
Well, essentially, so the number of people on JobKeeper have been revised down by 3 million after Treasury and the Tax Office revealed significant errors by businesses. So the estimated cost of the program, as you said, has been slashed, falling from 130 billion to around 70 billion. So a saving of, a theoretical saving of $60 billion. The bungle was revealed in a joint statement by Treasury and the Australian Tax Office, with the number of employees forecast to be supported by the coronavirus wage subsidy, now only 3.5 million instead of 6.5 million. So about 1,000 plus businesses made, quote, significant errors when they were reporting. So, for example, instead of writing one eligible employee who would have received $1,500 as part of the JobKeeper payment every fortnight, businesses wrote $1,500, i.e. the dollar sum.
Yeah.
To receive. So
right.
As a consequence of that, they saw these as, quite rightly, the Treasury and Tax Office saw these as employees. So 1,500 employees.
Yes.
In saying that, the businesses were not paid for 1,500 employees. That was quickly fact checked and revised and corrected. Right. But invariably, these businesses didn't miss out necessarily, but it certainly suggested there was, as a consequence, an overestimation and an extrapolation that wasn't required. So look, ultimately, as Josh Frydenberg said, the revelations are good news for taxpayers. Quote, importantly, there was no money that was sent out that shouldn't have been sent out. And there was no underpayment and there was no overpayment. The thing here, though, is, and I'm not sure 100% how I feel about this.
Okay.
But the thing here is, while there are 3 million people who are essentially have been overreported and overrepresented, that does essentially mean that there are 3 million people who are unemployed, right?
Yes.
Who aren't receiving JobKeeper and potentially aren't receiving Job Seeker. So they're not receiving JobKeeper, which was the crux of this scheme. They're not receiving the Job Seeker because we haven't seen the unemployment rate raise. If you're on Job Seeker, you are seeking jobs. So that qualifies you as one of the unemployed. So where have these 3 million people gone?
Yeah.
Does that mean that those 3 million people are still in paid work? Does that mean that they, were never laid off at all? And, we don't need to think about these 3 million people entering the unemployment queues over the next couple of, like that 3 million people is vastly greater than the 500,000 that Josh Frydenberg spoke about in Parliament, when he had his coughing fit, saying essentially we've had the biggest loss of employees ever, essentially, of 500,000. This is an extra 3 million on top of that. So where are they? Are they still in work? Are they, about to appear in unemployment queues? Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. Great for taxpayers, or is it?
It was interesting. Obviously you watch the sort of comments online and there's the army of people who are just chomping at the bit to get something against the government and we told you shouldn't have downloaded the COVID Safe app. Those sorts of people who are just like, can't wait for the government to make a mistake to tell everyone I told them so. And then at the same time, it's like, well, hang on. We just saved like billions of dollars. And I really, look, we live in a country, Australia has a tremendous amount of household debt, right? And one thing record levels of household debt, right? We also have a lot of people at the moment who are saying, oh my goodness, I've bought 4 or 5 investment properties and I'm losing such and such amount of money per week and all this sort of stuff. And
boomer.
And yeah, that's right. My point here is that maybe we're not the most economically savvy, citizens in the world. So I don't know. And so when this story comes out and Josh Frydenberg is sitting there going, look, we shouldn't spend this money. This is not money that we should be spending. We don't have an extra $60 billion. We have saved $60 billion. I feel like that's the right thing to do. Like if if we budgeted to buy a house, say, and it came down $200,000, I wouldn't be like, oh, wow, we've got an extra $200,000, like that feels like the not sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
You go, well, great, you've got $200,000 to spend. Well, no, you still have to pay that back and you still have to pay interest on that. And you still have to, like that money still comes from somewhere. Yeah. And I mean, I'm just talking about $200,000, which for me would be like, 2 years of solid work, saving every single penny that I earn.
Yeah.
Let alone 60 billion. That's a lot.
Yeah, no, I do agree, but I suppose
That's good, and that's the end of the podcast.
I do look. I completely agree with you. However, I don't. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think the other side of this is if, as suspected, there are 3 million people who were ineligible for JobKeeper
Mm.
and are still out of work, then that $60 billion is likely going to be chewed up by people in the unemployment queues, looking for job seeker
Yeah.
over the coming weeks anyway. So, or are potentially already there. So this is look. It's all a bit wonky. I absolutely concede and agree with you that this isn't necessarily a government error. Although I do recall, members of the of the media talking about how this form could have been improved to make it a little bit more
obviously.
user friendly and easy to read. But ultimately, this was done quickly, and it was done probably pretty close to expertly in a time that was, forgivably, essentially needed to be rushed.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to fault the government. What I would say
and we tried,
is,
didn't we, Jake? We sat here for hours going, all right, the government has to be at fault here somewhere, surely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the pre-podcast. Exactly. I do worry about this. This 3 million workers who are either employed, and that's great, or have not been accounted for, and thus, we can expect an even bigger hit to our economy in the coming weeks and months.
In which case, we'll bring you that news as well.
Yes.
Now, for those of you on Facebook, I'm just about to do something which is a bit odd, but I'm going to record the beginning of that story again because I have a little anecdote that I'd like to tell and link it in with this particular story. Is that all right with you, Jake? Is that all right with you?
Yes.
So let's go back. Let's pretend like we're going to go back to the beginning of that particular. Jake, when I was a young lad and I worked in a CD distribution warehouse, and my job was to get the boxes of CDs and print out an invoice for the customers, put the invoice inside that box, tape up that box, and then ship it off, right? Put a little sticker on the front and ship it off. Now, one day, I got a couple of things mixed up. I mixed up the invoice number with the amount that I was meant to charge the customer for their 5 or 6 CDs that they were getting distributed. So for 5 or 6 CDs, I think I charged them something like, which was the invoice number. So it was something like $15,467, for which I was, promptly, yes. Discussions were had. Customers were not happy with a $15,000 bill for a few CDs. Mind you, we did check to see if there were any limited edition sort of, Stevie Wonder albums or something in there, which, I think it was the time that... I think it was the time... Anyway. Anyway, got reprimanded for that. Jay Fry has had his moment in the sun with a similar sort of story. So I'm glad to see that it's not just, humble teenagers who are working in CD distribution warehouses who can make this, mistake. It's also treasurers.
Absolutely. Great anecdote, Greg. I agree. It's exactly the same.
Except totally different because it's not his fault.
No, exactly.
Anyway. All right. Now,
I don't like the next story, the liar. It's boring.
Okay. Yeah, well, we've been going for 50. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Should we skip the Pavlo?
It's up to you. I didn't read it so deeply, but I can absolutely provide on-the-spot commentary.
All right, well, let's just do it, and I'll see how I feel at the end of it all.
Sounds good.
Okay. Now, Jake, it's not often that I bring a story to the podcast and that we decide we're going to discuss it, mainly because my stories are usually about, grooming dogs and, things like that, and you just say, Greg, it's just not hard-hitting enough.
Never happened.
That's right. They're all for the pooch. This story has caught my attention, though. It's a story about he refers to himself as a UQ senator, so this is the University of Queensland. He is an elected senator at the university. He was elected there, and often refers to himself as a key spokesperson. His name is Drew Pavlo, and he's a fourth-year philosophy student at the University of Queensland. This week, he wrote an article for foreignpolicy.com where he says that he faces expulsion on the grounds that he prejudiced the university's reputation by using his position as an elected student representative to express support for Hong Kong's democratic protesters. He said that UQ enjoys perhaps the closest relationships of any university with the Chinese government in the Anglosphere. In addition to funding and controlling a Confucius Institute on campus, the Chinese government funds at least 4 accredited UQ courses that present a party-approved version of Chinese history to students, glossing over human rights abuses in Shanghai, Tibet, Hong Kong, and mainland China. Now, these words are scary to me, Jake. I'm frightened. The idea that there's party-approved versions of Chinese history being taught to UQ students, the idea that China is funding, a university to a point where they actually have to approve certain, topics to be discussed in university. We see this a lot, this sort of university backlash in the United States. Not so much here. I've sort of had a bit more faith in the universities here than maybe what I should have. But, there's certainly in the United States, there's this idea that the universities teach a version of history that has to do with patriarchy and all that sort of stuff. I'd hate to see that sort of information being distilled here. It seems like it is, though.
Revisionist history type stuff.
Yeah, revisionist history and, just eliminating certain topics from history. In addition to these state-backed courses, the Chinese Consul General in Brisbane, Zhu Ji, serves as an honorary professor at the university. Now, this particular Consul General, the Chinese Consul General, he actually called for sort of a bit of aggression against Drew Pavlo. So Drew basically went ahead and started criticizing the connections between the University of Queensland and China, saying that it was far too much in the pockets of China. This Consul General, Zhu Ji, actually went to great lengths on Twitter, I think, or something, it released an official statement saying that Drew was an enemy of China. This led to a whole raft of death threats to Drew via Twitter, threats against his family, terrible descriptions about what people were going to do to his family because he was, being outspoken about Hong Kong and about the UQ's ties to China. I think it started with he started actually supporting the protesters in Hong Kong first, being quite vocal about that, and that's how this sort of started. The UQ actually then made Zhu Ji an honorary professor at the university. And Drew has been very, very vocal, saying that he's an elected member of the UQ team. He refers to himself as a senator, which means that the person who actually made Zhu Ji the honorary professor, he's the Vice Chancellor Peter Hodge, is essentially Drew's colleague. So essentially, rather than Peter Hodge backing Drew through all of this sort of vocalizing of support for China, support for the protests in Hong Kong, Peter's actually gone the other way and made someone who was actually, basically saying that Drew was an enemy of the state of China, an honorary professor. This went on even further. They've now tried to basically terminate Drew's position at the university. UQ have gone so far as to release a 186-page brief of allegations against Mr. Pavlo. And The Guardian actually spent a little bit of time in this space. They went through the 186-page allegations. They spent some time, going over sort of court cases and things like that. Most of the allegations relate to clearly satirical stunts, they write. And his anti-Beijing activism, posing outside the Vice Chancellor's office wearing a hazmat suit, promoting a fake Confucius Institute panel discussion about why, I don't know how to say that word, Uyghurs, is it?
I don't know.
Yeah, Uyghurs must be exterminated. Yeah, look, he's quite
Jaeger.
Uyghur, yeah.
Yeah.
He's quite a funny character. He certainly has a funny Twitter feed. This Drew person. He doesn't strike me as the type of individual who's out for attention for himself. He's really quite softly spoken. He's really quite sort of articulate with his thoughts. He's quite calm. It doesn't seem like the type of person who's trying to a big note himself. He's just a little bit confused as to how this is all sort of unfolded. Look, if you want my opinion, it's pretty obvious that that what's happening here, that UQ are actually in the pockets of China a little too much, that they've relied on China too much, and now are being dictated to by China, which to me is really absolutely terrifying. To his credit, Drew has actually kept a little bit of sense of humor about himself here. If you jump onto his Twitter feed, you could just punch him into the search, Drew Pavlo, and he's quite satirical, right? He's quite satirical. He's quite blunt. He's quite funny, and it's been a sort of an interesting journey to try and follow this. Not only has he received a fair bit of support from sort of right-wing commentators, he's also actually got vocal support from Pauline Hanson. Pauline Hanson has been, and see, he's quite left-leaning too, so it's really quite funny because he's quite sort of Bernie Sanders focused. He's quite, quite sort of almost socialist focused, I guess you could say. And meanwhile, Pauline Hanson is saying, "Look, I don't care about all of that. I actually really support you and your vocalization of the Hong Kong protests, of UQ being far too in the pockets of China." She went so far as to be on Sky News, basically just saying she's in full support of what Drew stands for. And that
Sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting because that puts him in a bit of a spot. It's an interesting process to go through if you've got Pauline Hanson agreeing with you.
Sure, and many people would say if Pauline Hanson is in favour of something, then generally that's on the wrong side of history. That opinion is on the wrong side of history, and you should consider the opposite. I mean, frankly, this is a really interesting case. I would probably like to know in what capacity Drew was commenting on his support for the Hong Kong protesters when he said it. What I mean is, was he saying, on behalf of the university and on behalf of the student body, we hold this position?
Yeah, that's exactly what he was doing. But I think it started maybe as a personal thing, right? So my understanding is that it started as a bit of a personal thing, but then he actually ran for the UQ Senate. And the university actually tried to basically muddy the waters and tried to smear him, and it didn't work. It actually backfired. He got voted into the Senate. Now, the way he's interpreted that is to say, well, I actually have been voted in on this platform, so I actually speak on behalf of the people. Therefore, this is actually a position held by the University of Queensland. So the University of Queensland have actually democratically voted someone in who runs on the platform that they support Hong Kong. Therefore, the University of Queensland support Hong Kong. And
that's murky. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, he's speaking in the same capacity that any politician, for example, might speak in when they speak out on a matter of, say, public interest.
Yeah.
I suppose the big question would be, did he breach any University of Queensland standards? And if not, why the hell is the University of Queensland getting behind this political situation, or why are they injecting themselves into this political conversation? Why on earth are they allowing this student to be lambasted for his for his outspokenness at university, which is, people come into their opinions at university. People come into their understanding of the world in university. And the interesting thing here is, this guy clearly has a following. He clearly has a way to speak, a way to get his opinions out into the public sphere. and he has just formed a rather justified opinion of China because of the way that various Chinese, institutions reacted to his support of the Hong Kong protesters. This is a fascinating case, isn't it?
It is fascinating, and to me, there's only one real conclusion, right? I mean, look, it's obvious to me that there's a certain level of dictatorship happening at UQ from China. I mean, it's that simple. There's only one real sort of. I mean, look, we don't have UQ's side here, right? I mean, obviously, there's a fair few people taking Drew's side, but like I say, I've tried to go down the rabbit hole a fair bit, and there's no aggressiveness from Drew. There's no big noting himself. There's no, I've seen some people who sort of lead these crusades, and they're quite sort of egotistical. They're quite sort of, almost messianistic in their manner. He doesn't strike me like that. This seems to be a bit of a different case, a bit of a genuine case, and he's also kept his sense of humor about himself. He's really quite a funny character, and we'd love to have him on the show. I've reached out to him a little bit, but I haven't received a response. But I'd love to get him on the show and have a chat with him. Absolutely fascinating. Look, they did actually hold a hearing for his dismissal. I think on Wednesday of this week, he walked out claiming it was a kangaroo court. They haven't really allowed him to have representation, but at first they didn't allow him to have representation, but now they have allowed him to have representation. And I think the man's name is Peter. No, that's Peter Hodge. He's actually represented now by a very high-profile human rights lawyer.
Wow!
Yeah, so he's starting to get a little bit of momentum with what he's doing and his cause. I think that from the outset.
Say what the charges are?
That he's basically using his position to make light of and to what is it like murky the reputation of the University of Queensland, basically.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So look, it's very, very interesting. It's very fascinating.
I do get. I mean, I kind of get UQ's position here in that they are a private institution, although all universities in Australia have some element of public funding. The Tertiary University Act in Parliament that enables that. But this is UQ who is by all rights, one of Queensland's, if not Queensland's finest universities, and one of Australia's, top five.
Yeah.
Trying to protect their interests. A lot of their student base, their international student base, pre-COVID, obviously, it likely came from China. All universities to a fair extent rely on international students to essentially pay for their bottom line, pay for their academics and their research that they perform. So, from that perspective, I can understand UQ saying that essentially we are protecting our own business interests by preventing this person from making public commentary on behalf of the university or on behalf of the student body. But it's still, this is one of those interesting cases of if you counter them, you will invariably give them publicity. So potentially they could have just enabled this to pass by without any issue by just not addressing it.
Yeah, but at the same time, it seems like there's some influence, certainly from China's.
But can we really allege that? I mean, I get it. I get that we've got the social media commentary, and we've got this the Consul General referring to him in a particular way.
Yeah, as an enemy of the state of China.
But are those is the commentary from the Consul General and the Twitter backlash related to UQ trying to get rid of him, or is UQ trying to get rid of him specifically because they've tarnished the UQ representation on an international basis?
Yeah, I mean, look, there is, I suppose, that idea. It just seems like really aggressive
It is, yeah.
It
does seem very aggressive.
unnecessarily aggressive. And to me, I mean, from the outside looking in anyway at the moment, I mean, it's sort of one of those things where you're just like, there's only one thing that makes sense here. There's only one real sort of path that this goes down, and it's not pretty for UQ, I'll give you that. But yeah, like I say, there's I was watching is it the Kenny Report on Sky News?
Oh, Chris Kenny?
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, okay, yep.
Yeah, the Kenny Report. Yeah. And so he, Drew's been on there, and that was him discussing that with Chris Kenny and Pauline Hanson literally next to him on a screen saying that she fully backs him. So you've got,
wow.
I mean, that's not pretty. So he's obviously got the backing of a lot of left-leaning people and a lot of backing of
a lot of right, very right-leaning people.
I mean, look, it was hard to find, because I was digging, right, and I was trying to find out what the other side might be. It's very hard. It's not a pretty thing, and I don't think UQ are really conducting themselves in a very good light in that regard. But that's okay. We will. Look, it's fascinating. I'd love to have him on the show. I'd love to get that angle from him. That'd be great. We'll keep trying to reach out and hopefully get a little interview. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, that's all I got.
Well, let's wrap up.
Jake, what a week.
It's a week.
A cold week. A cold week.
It's been a cold week. And isn't it great to be able to talk about the weather again?
Ah, man. It's great to be able to see news items that are not about coronavirus. I'll give you the tip. There's a little bit of corona fatigue, isn't there?
Yeah. Critique, if you like.
Yes, I do like. I'm happy to take that on board. Jake, when our listeners have finished writing letters of complaint to
Chinese consulate,
to the Chinese consulate about UQ's conduct, what would you like them to do?
3 things. 3-step plan.
Go.
Rate. Review. Subscribe.
Nice. Very quick. And if you want to share the love with your friends, family, or foes, you can tell them to head to thepouchthepodcast.com where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice. Jake, thank you very much for chatting with me this week.
Greg, thank you.
Good. You should thank me, Jake.
Yes, I do, regularly. I think you're a wonderful human being.
Because I broadcast myself with this face.
Yeah. Which is great.
With confidence.
Maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's quarantine.
All right, Jake. I'll talk to you next Sunday.
You better.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace.